stand by for action.
Thanks for joining me. My name's Dave Miller. I am the Unpleasant Blind Guy. Now, we're going to start out by thanking Skip, that's Sticky Wickets with a Z, on the Twitter for kind words about my last show and for subscribing to the Unpleasant Blind Guy YouTube channel. And I want to thank Idiot Obama, that's Idiot_Obama, for my last show's inclusion on their Twitter compilation, Red Eye Daily. Now, as you've seen, I've named this particular show Bossy instead of the name that it actually is, which is American Dimitude, Part 1, because whenever someone wants to ban the use of a word like bossy, I tend to want to use that word, like bossy, as many times as I can, because I think people who try to ban words are bossy. This is the United States of America, and we should be allowed to use the words that we want to use. Social evolution will take care of the banning. Thank you very much. Now, this show is going to be somewhat unusual. Those who have listened to my show for a while are not going to be surprised to hear that. So here we go. If you've listened to this show any length of time, you know that I am a supporter of the English Defense League. And if you want a little bit of background on that, check out my previous show called Demonstrations. Now, there was a BBC documentary put on the air called EDL Girls Don't Call Me Racist. And I decided to share that out on Twitter. And someone who follows me on Twitter began having a discussion with me about the program. And I shared that discussion with some of my friends who happen to be in the EDL. And then what happens? One of my friends decides to chime in on the conversation, even though I had not previously named him to do so. Now, before I get into what this individual said, I want to get into the purpose here. People in the EDL, and indeed people in the Tea Party movement in the United States of America, and indeed all people who are working against their various statist governments, realize that they are in a very important fight. It's a struggle against a ruling class who wield minions through the use of political correctness and social engineering to get their way. One of the places where they are getting their way is they're allowing political Islam to flourish. I am against political Islam. Now, what does that mean from my perspective? As an American, what that means is that I have no problem when Islamists practice Sharia, as long as they do so in their own mosques and homes, and as long as they obey the secular laws of the Western nations in which they live. This means no honor killings. This means no sex with underage girls. And this means no importation of unlicensed medical practitioners to cut the clitorises of their daughters. I also am against the practice of Sharia on the streets of Western nations in the form of Sharia patrols. The streets of the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and other Western nations are there for all of their people, of all religions, all colors, all backgrounds. They are not there to be claimed by the practitioners of any single religion and policed by those practitioners. That's not how we do things in the West. Also, I am not for the use of Sharia in politics. I do believe that there must be a separation of church and state, and Islamists do tend to practice the melding of church and state in ways that create an atmosphere of abuse and inequality. Abuse and inequality for women, abuse and inequality for gays, and abuse and inequality for anyone who doesn't believe in the same way that they do. Now, those being my positions, and you knowing them, are quite different from this friend of mine who decided to chime in on this conversation about EDL Girls Don't Call Me Racist. Now, this individual and I have been friends for over 20 years. He is normally a stand-up freedom fighter with whom I would stand shoulder to shoulder to fight injustice any day of the week. That said, it's pretty obvious from his tweets and from his initial injection into the conversation that he believes himself to be a moral and intellectual superior to supporters of not only the English Defense League, but to all of those who wish to keep political Islam out of the West. He's a good friend, and I've said I'm not going to name him, but I did call him and let him know that I'm going to use his tweets in this show and maybe one or two after this one, because he is dangerously wrong. Now, the first significant tweet was, "And nearly all these damn Jews will bring about the ruination of society as we know it." Now, I want you to notice the sarcasm, the derision, the intellectual chauvinism that drips from that tweet. Now, this is exactly the sort of thing that statists do to members of the Tea Party movement here in the United States, and it's exactly the sort of smarmy sarcasm that's thrown at members of the English Defense League, Restore Australia, and other groups that are trying to put a stop to political Islam. And I'll answer it. I don't see a whole lot of Jewish pedophile gangs running around. I don't see a whole lot of Hasidic Jews saying that we must have Mosaic law and trying to enforce Mosaic law on the streets of Western cities. I don't see a lot of Jewish people moving into countries, taking them over, and then making everyone else either pay tribute to them, basically pay protection to them, or suffer the consequences. I don't see Jewish people doing that. I don't see Christians doing that. I don't see Buddhists doing that. I don't see Hindus doing that. The only ones that I see doing that in recent history have been Islamists. And if you want proof of that, all you have to do is look at the previous history of Lebanon. Now, I can remember back far enough to 1975 when the civil war in Lebanon began. Now, Lebanon used to have a mixture of Christians, Islamists, and others. It was the cosmopolitan country of the Middle East. If you look nowadays, it's an Islamic country. And it got that way through direct violence. No, the Islamists are not like Jewish people or Christians or the practitioners of any other religion in the modern day. They have a well-proven method that they use to insinuate themselves into nations that they want to take over, just as my friend insinuated himself into this conversation where he had not been previously invited. The only difference is that the Islamists will not stop at words. They will use violence, they have used violence, and they will continue to use violence until the rest of the world says enough. Now we'll get on to his second tweet. "Many terrorists are Islamic. Not all who follow Islam are terrorists." Let me put that to bed. Recently, 59 kids at a boarding school in Nigeria were murdered by Islamists. Now, I don't have much vision left, but I did see the pictures. It was a horror. I didn't hear a whole lot of protest from the Islamic community. I did, however, hear much protest. Thousands of people in the streets protesting the drawing and publishing in Scandinavia of a cartoon of Muhammad. So, let's see if we've got this in perspective here. A cartoon of Muhammad will cause worldwide riots, and the murder of 59 innocent kids in Nigeria gets practically nothing. Now, I've heard that supposedly only 10% of Islamists are actually the quote-unquote bad Islamists. Okay, well, let's take that figure. In fact, let's be really generous and say that only 1% of Islamists either engage directly in kinetic jihad or support it directly. Now, there are supposedly 1 billion Islamists worldwide. Now, 10% of that is 100 million. 10% of that is 10 million. 10 million people who either participate directly in kinetic jihad or who support it directly. 10 million people is a slow Sunday in New York. That's a lot of people. let's take that figure. My question is, if the vast majority of Islamists don't support terror, why weren't there at least 1 million Islamists on the streets protesting the murder of those kids in Nigeria? Why are there not more than enough Islamists in London and in other cities to go out and physically pull the Sharia patrols off of the streets? Why are there not enough Islamists, if most of them don't support terror and don't support a worldwide caliphate, to stop acts of terror almost completely? Now, the only thing that I can conclude is that some of them have to be afraid for themselves, because people who are willing to resort to sharpening someone's fingers so that they can write in blood who Muhammad's mother is are pretty scary people. And naturally, there are some who want to protect their families against such uncivilized thugs. And I'll buy that for a good percentage of the population. But that's a good percentage of 1 billion people. I'm not going to be convinced that the vast majority of 1 billion people couldn't step on this small minority of the quote-unquote bad Islamists like the stinking, pernicious insects that they are. So, guys, the numbers just don't add up. And honestly, I wish they did. I'm not looking for anyone to hate. I want equal participation in the society that I grew up in for everyone. That's for everyone that wants that same equal participation for everyone else. If someone wants to exclude other people and set themselves up as the religious rulers over everyone else in a morphosed American society, I ain't in it. And that, according to the numbers as I can see them, is exactly what Islamists in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, indeed in the entire West, are trying to do. It's not a situation where there are only a few bad Islamists and everyone else are walking around innocent. There are enough of them, if they chose to intervene on behalf of civilization. They just don't. And the only conclusion I can come to is because they silently approve. Now, does that mean 100% of Islamists? No, it doesn't. I'm sure there are some practitioners of Islam out there who believe that Sharia should remain in the home and should not be brought into the public square, and they believe in equality between the religions in a civilized Western state. But I contend that that number of Islamists is very few. If it were larger, if it were the majority of Islamists, you would see that, because they would put a stop to much of what the quote-unquote bad Islamists have done. Now, I'm going to cover part 2 in my next show. Until then, let's get to something happier. That's this time's Awesome American. Awesome Americans this time are quite a few people. We're talking about the basketball teams and the crowd at a game between Trinity Classical Academy and the Desert Chapel Eagles in California. Now, this story was filed by ABC News on the 11th of March. Freshman Bo Howell made it into many games this season as team manager for his California high school basketball team at Trinity Classical Academy, but he had never scored. During the last few minutes of the championship game with rivals Desert Chapel Eagles, he took to the floor with the crowd chanting, "Bo, Bo, Bo," and each team encouraging him to take several shots until the ball sailed through the hoop. Even the supposedly impartial sportscasters couldn't help but say, "Go, Bo." Now, I'm going to put this article up at UBG Contact on the Twitter, along with a link to EDL Girls Don't Call Me Racist. UBG Contact on the Twitter is where you can contact me with questions, suggestions, Awesome American suggestions. Americans are doing awesome things all over this country of ours, and I want to hear about them if they're going on in your local area. Please contact me with those, and I'll try and keep you informed. Because stories like this happen in the United States of America all the time. It's this kind of sportsmanship shown by the team members of these two schools that epitomize what sports should be in the United States of America. And I take the hat I don't wear off to these people for giving Bo Howell his moment in the sun. Well, that's it for this time, people. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye.